I would like to introduce this talk on the fourth way as a method of transformation by reflecting on the current situation. Now that Gurdjieff and his teachings are available at the tap of a keyboard across the internet, as opposed to when I came upon him essentially hidden underground below mainstream society, found by those who were seriously seeking and in need of this kind of knowledge. There has been a plethora of misinformation, misunderstanding. One of the key elements of this misunderstanding of the fourth way is that it is claimed by the esoteric world, keeping it dislocated from the deeper teachings of humanity. More importantly, there is a shocking lack of recognition of the roots of these teachings. In fact, Gurdjieff was mentored by a Russian Orthodox priest. What we find in his teachings on self-observation are exact parallels to the ancient teachings and instructions to the monks on the watch of the heart. The Neptic Fathers, as they were called in Eastern Orthodoxy, who were entirely focused on a psychotherapy of attention, awareness of the logismoi, the thoughts, inner separation, the very essence of the inner work presented in the fourth way, most especially as seen in the writings of Maurice Nicole. And yet for decades this has been rejected, namely because the West has been so utterly ignorant of these ancient teachings, of the Philokalia, of St. John Climacus and the Ladder of Divine Ascent, of all of these extraordinary teachings, John Cassian, Evagrius, Theophan the Recluse, Unseen Warfare, dynamic, practical methodologies on what the ancients called the path of theosis, divinization, God realization, which is at the heart of the original Christian purpose, lost to the West since 1054. Lost to the Catholic West, lost especially to the Protestant sects, who know absolutely nothing about this. Just recently, these deep teachings have begun to resurface, thanks in part to Father Seraphim Rose, to figures like Callistos Ware. But still, we are faced with an ignorance and an aggressive prejudice. New Thought people, New Age people do not want to have anything to do with Christianity, and so they steer the Gurdjieffian legend, mythology, into Sufism, into the ancient brotherhoods like the Sarmung Brotherhood that may or may not have been invented by Gurdjieff, but that stirs the imagination, is exotic, which all of us have gone through as seekers in our search for wonder, mystery, the sacred, things that our religion and society in the West were barren of, are barren of. And yet, here we have historically, psychologically, spiritually, a direct link to the most profound mystical Christianity still making its way to the West. And found in this way of Gurdjieff and his iconoclastic, in some ways trickster approach, breaking all the rules, shocking people. Gurdjieff the man had to be this kind of bulldozer individual to make his way through the Russian Revolution, across Western Europe, into France ultimately, in the midst of World War II. Shot at, nearly deadly car accident. This extraordinary individual needed to be that sort of a person to plant in the West these seeds that have been growing for the last 60 years, 70 years. Some have called him even the father of the New Age, in that he impacted so many different aspects of human thought. Those who have benefited from the transformational power of his teachings have gone into psychology and religion and philosophy and other disciplines and brought something of his influence into our time. And of course, those who have created schools around him, so-called purists, if you will, who want to retain the 1940s, 1920s version of Gurdjieff, the man, in other words, a certain worship of that individual, certainly charismatic in the extreme, are doing a disservice to his legacy by not allowing it to flourish and reveal itself for what it truly is. Gurdjieff left it open-ended, saying, verify everything for yourself, expecting us to use our own mind, and certainly radically against confusing the message for the messenger. He himself called it esoteric Christianity. This was a man of prayer, a man intensely aware of the reality of the holy, and yet one who could change his ways and appearance and energy to fit any situation and to serve his purposes. In many ways, he was a tragic figure, and J.G. Bennett, one of his longtime students, said in the last years of his life he had the saddest eyes he had ever seen. But his work, his teachings, his efforts, super efforts, have allowed these last few generations of seekers to be transformed. For myself, it was like a volcano in my existence, and allowed me to approach spirituality and religion in an entirely different way, through consciousness, through use of attention, through presence in the moment, through existential, authentic ways of becoming. Unified, authentic, transparent, to something greater. Was he a flawed human being? Of course. He was not seeking to be a saint. And yet he leads us towards those paths of cleansing the inside of the cup, as Christ said, in ways that are practical and applicable and to be used in everyday life. The fourth way is in life, as intensive a discipline as that of the monk or the yogi, as he says. But to leave it within an esoteric realm, disconnected from its deepest roots, is ultimately to go in a wrong direction. Because the purpose of all his efforts, despite his behaviors that were so jolting, is to strip us of pride and vanity, bring us into that radical humility and self-knowledge and awareness, and lift us into a higher state of consciousness, where agape love becomes possible. We owe this man a great deal. May he not be continually misrepresented, misunderstood. Hear now his teachings, the essential ones that reveal the extraordinary power and even purity of his gift to humanity for all who seek inner transformation into their true selves. In the 1927 manuscript Introduction to Fragments of an Unknown Teaching, P.D. Ouspensky, a key teacher of the Fourth Way, wrote, "The predominant emotion in me was fear. Fear to lose myself, fear to disappear in something unknown. I remember a phrase in a letter I wrote at that time. I am writing this letter to you, but who will write the next letter, signing it with my name, and what he will say, I do not know." This was the fear. Ouspensky, a Russian philosopher, was referring to the transformative impact of what is called the system, the work, or the Fourth Way. This teaching is a method of intense personal effort performed on oneself for the purpose of knowing oneself objectively and evolving into a higher state of consciousness that awakens us to a whole new experience of reality. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff brought these powerful ideas to the West from ancient and secret sources in the East. This extraordinary system of thought ranges from the most intimate psychological insights to a grandiose cosmology linking the individual with the universe. It is a synthesis of practices and teachings formatted for the Western scientific mind. It is named the Fourth Way to differentiate it from the other ways of conscious evolution, the way of the monk, the way of the fakir, the way of the yogi. Each of these classic methods of human transformation focus on different aspects of the individual: emotional, physical, instinctive, intellectual. The Fourth Way deals with all of these dimensions at once, seeking to create a balanced individual whose inner work of transformation occurs in the midst of his or her daily activities. It is not necessary to live in monasteries or ashrams in order to apply this spiritual concentration. Yet the efforts made are as intense and demanding as any of the practices that take place in those settings. The work is entirely inner, invisible, and individual. The evolution of human consciousness is a matter of personal efforts and is therefore a rare exception among the majority of human beings. To those who would wonder at the seeming unfairness of this assertion, Ouspensky responds that most people simply do not want to awaken. To become a different being, we must want it greatly and over many years. Without the necessary efforts, we will not evolve. Moreover, we must acquire qualities that we believe we already possess, but in fact do not. In the Fourth Way, this insight is the first step in the direction of inner evolution. We do not know ourselves. Human beings have invented many machines, and we know that a complicated machine needs sometimes years of careful study before one can use it or control it. But we do not apply this knowledge to ourselves, although we ourselves are a much more complicated machine than any machine we have invented. This machine is brought into motion by external influences. All actions, ideas, and emotions are responses to the stimulus of external events. For Gurdjieff, such mechanical persons are asleep to their true condition and virtually incapable of change. He says, by himself he is just an automaton with a certain store of memories of previous experiences and a certain amount of reserve energy. Human beings, therefore, cannot do. Everything happens to us as to puppets pulled by invisible strings. Uspensky believed that if we could perceive this phenomenon, then things would begin to change for us. We human beings are not merely stimulus-response machines, but machines that can know that we are machines. Realizing this, we may find ways to cease being simply reactive organisms. Another central idea in the fourth way is that the individual is not one. We have no permanent I or ego. Every thought, feeling, sensation, desire is an I which believes that it is the whole person. Yet none of these I's are connected, and each depends on the change of external circumstances. To make matters worse, there are often impenetrable defenses between each I, which the work calls buffers, separating these subpersonalities from one another. Gurdjieff stated that one of our most important mistakes is our illusion about our unity. He wrote, "His I changes as quickly as his thoughts, feelings, and moods, and he makes the profound mistake in considering himself always one and the same person. In reality, he is always a different person, not the one he was a moment ago." Our every thought and desire lives separately and independently from the whole. According to Gurdjieff, we are made of thousands of separate I's, often unknown to one another, and sometimes mutually exclusive and hostile to each other. Man is a plurality, man's name is legion. The alternation of I's is controlled by accidental external influences. There is nothing in us able to control the change of I's, mainly because we do not notice it. Each separate I calls itself I and acts in the name of the whole person. This explains why people so often make decisions and so seldom carry them out. A little self-observation will prove that we usually think, feel, move, and respond without our being aware of what is happening within us. This self-observation is in fact the first practical effort required in the fourth way. The student is to create an observing I, which observes with objectivity his or her inner activity. To develop an objective space within which can see without judging is extremely difficult, but is also the first breakthrough out of our mechanical behavior and the state of sleep in which it keeps us. Consciousness is a particular kind of awareness concerning who we are, where we are in the moment, and what we know in the deepest dimension of our being. It never remains the same, but can be made continuous and controllable through special efforts and study. The fourth way points to 4 states of consciousness: sleep, waking state, self-consciousness, and objective consciousness. Most everyone lives only in the first 2 states. The third state, self-consciousness, is one that we believe we possess even though we are conscious of ourselves only in rare flashes. Such flashes come in exceptional moments, in highly emotional states, in times of danger, or in new and unexpected circumstances. We have no control over their coming and going. Gurdjieff stated, "If we knew the quantity of wrong observations, wrong theories, wrong deductions and conclusions made in this state, our ordinary consciousness, we should cease to believe ourselves altogether." Dr. Catherine Spieth, in her book The Gurdjieff Work, observes that anyone who has a difficult time accepting the notion that as we are we have but few moments of true self-consciousness ought to make a study of the loose jaws and vacant stares of people in public places and in situations where they do not think that they are being observed. According to the fourth way, the central obstacle to higher levels of consciousness is a phenomenon known as identification. Uspensky described it in this manner. In this state, man has no separate awareness. He is lost in whatever he happens to be doing, feeling, thinking. Because he is lost, immersed, not present to himself, this condition is known as a state of waking sleep. When we are identified, our attention is directed outward, and we are lost to ourselves. Self-consciousness is then a state in which we become aware of ourselves and are no longer hypnotized by the external event before us. There is a higher level still to be reached, which the work calls objective consciousness. In this state, we come into contact with the real world from which we are seemingly cut off. In order to see clearly the roots of our psychological distortions, the fourth way defines two aspects of the individual: essence and personality. Essence is what a person is born with. Personality is that which is acquired. All that is learned, both unconsciously through imitation and through acquired likes and dislikes, constitutes the outer part of the person, that which is changed by outer circumstances. Though personality is necessary, it must not be left to dominate essence, or it will produce artificial persons cut off from their true natures. Uspensky wrote, "This means that with a quick and early growth of personality, growth of essence can practically stop at a very early age, and as a result, we see men and women externally quite grown up, but whose essence remains at the age of 10 or 12. According to Rodney Collin, one of Uspensky's primary students who started his own fourth-way school in South America, the fundamental abnormality in human beings lies precisely in the divergence between personality and essence. The more nearly we know ourselves for what we are, the more we approach wisdom. The more our imagination about ourselves diverges from what we actually are, the more insane we become." He writes, "Unless a man first finds himself, finds his own essential nature and destiny, and begins from them, all his efforts and achievements will be built only on the sand of personality, and at the first serious shock, the whole structure will crumble, perhaps destroying him in its fall. Through the practice of self-remembering, we can separate ourselves from the pretenses and imitations that have enslaved us since childhood, and return to who we actually are. Such a return to our essential nature is accompanied by a sense of liberation unlike any other. To thyself be true is the first commandment on the way of self-development." Maurice Nicole states in his psychological commentaries on the teachings of Gurdjieff and Uspensky that as you make progress in the work, what you took as yourself begins to look like a little prison house far away in the valley beneath you. This is a vivid expression of the third state of consciousness, or self-remembering as it is called. These flashes of greater consciousness are the unexpected results of the strenuous efforts made in order not to lose oneself in the rush of outer circumstances, to be cleansed from the acids of negativity, and to maintain a heightened awareness grounded in the present. The student is to reach a point where he or she can make the choice not to react automatically to external stimuli. This requires going against the grain, resisting long-established habits and self-indulgences. The question is as basic as, can you find the willpower to choose not to react angrily to something that makes you angry? Rather than being wasted in such an outburst, the energy accumulated through this effort can be available for a moment of intensified consciousness. This moment will flood you with peace or quiet joy or a sense of profound liberation. Oddly enough, these rare and precious moments often come in very paradoxical events. When night is darkest, a shaft of light can suddenly break through. Self-remembering, combined with the insights of objective self-observation, assists in the creation of a balanced individual who is not completely under the sway of his or her inborn nature and acquired habits. It is not possible to experience a vaster sense of reality if we are entirely under the dominance of the intellect to the exclusion of the emotional or the instinctive part of our nature, and vice versa. In attempting to make the machine work right, it is necessary to change attitudes and behavior developed over years of wrong functioning. Maurice Nicole gives a hint of these first stages of real change in his psychological commentaries. This gradual withdrawal of energy from the customary, easily resentful and brittle feeling of I is accompanied by a gradual, new, and broader feeling of I, as if one were living in a larger place. It is like being introduced to a new civilization, to another form of life. He points out that by using the inner camera of self-observation, we begin to open a mind above the level of the sensual mind. Here is where the psychological experiences of the fourth way begin to reveal their numinous and spiritual character. Self-remembering, then, is a process of being lifted out of our ordinary sense of self into a purified, detached space well known to those long practiced in meditation. But in the fourth way, this birth of new awareness can be accomplished while one crosses a city street or takes out the trash. Nevertheless, despite the practical approach of the work, self-remembering remains as intangible and paradoxical as any spiritual exercise. Reminiscent of the Zen koan, Rodney Collin told his students that we cannot remember ourselves until we forget ourselves. And at the height of his powers of understanding, he united the fourth way with the wisdom of all times and places, saying, "To feel beauty, to feel truth, that is self-remembering. Self-remembering is the awareness of the presence of God." The idea that we are not awake but live in a partial dream state from which we can awaken opens radically new horizons. The illusions we foster concerning ourselves melt under the light of increased consciousness, and we awaken to new dimensions of reality that set us free. We are then able to relate to the world around us without the usual defenses, masks, and confusion that constitute much of human interaction. We become capable of a new kind of compassion. At their core, the originators of the fourth way as we know it today were religious men, spiritual men in the true sense of the term. Work on oneself leads to a liberation that can be compared to the enlightenment and divinization of more traditionally religious methods. One of the central teachings in ancient religious orders was the intentional division of attention between oneself and the outside world. By splitting our attention in two directions, we learn to be aware of ourselves acting, feeling, or thinking in relation to the outer world. This is how the fourth way teaches us to remember ourselves, by moments at first, and then with increasing frequency. In proportion as we learn to remember ourselves, our actions acquire a consistency that is impossible as long as our attention is locked in one direction. Divided attention is the chief characteristic of self-remembering. There are certain experiences in which this takes place naturally, such as the sensations of love, where an intense awareness of oneself and of another occurs at the same time. This is a foretaste of the next stage of consciousness. A certain stage of relaxation is helpful in dividing one's attention. When we are able to divide our attention between the outside world and awareness of ourselves, we can see our reactions to ideas and events without being instantly victimized by our responses to the particular stimulus. This, in turn, allows us to remain in a state of serenity that generates feelings of healing and liberation. Due to the power of the work and the impact it can have on the psyche, it is possible to let oneself become enslaved to a teacher or an organization. Yet the fourth way is precisely meant to avoid all that. It is meant to lead us to our true master, the master within, and to transcend even the work's own magnificent thought structures, so that every student can find for himself or herself a higher consciousness that constantly seeks to reach us, if only we would make the effort to awaken and ready ourselves to receive its treasures of wisdom and regeneration.